It was just a picture of three siblings, but the youngest one seems different. Michael Brennan had collected antique photographs for over 20 years, but nothing in his collection compared to the image he found at the Chicago estate sale that cold February morning. The sale was held in an old brownstone on the south side, filled with furniture and belongings from a family that had lived there for 3 generations. Most collectors ignored the box of old photographs sitting near the back entrance, but Michael always looked through every single one. History lived in these forgotten images, ordinary people frozen in time, their stories lost to the decades. He sifted through wedding portraits, baby pictures, and family gatherings, setting aside a few that showed interesting period clothing or architecture. Then he found it. 3 children posed in what appeared to be a professional photography studio. 2 boys, perhaps 10 and 12 years old, stood on either side of a younger girl, who sat rigidly in an ornate chair between them. The photograph was dated 1905 in faded ink on the back. The boys wore matching dark suits with white shirts and bow ties. Their expressions were serious but natural, typical of children told to hold still for the camera. But the girl was different. Michael brought the photograph closer to his face, squinting in the dim light. Something about her appearance made his skin prickle. She wore an elaborate white dress with lace trim and ribbons, far more ornate than her brother's clothing. Her hands were positioned perfectly in her lap, fingers arranged with unnatural precision. Her face showed no expression whatsoever, not the slight tension of trying to hold still, not the hint of a suppressed smile. Nothing. Her eyes were the most disturbing element. They were open, staring forward, but seemed to focus on nothing at all. The boys had the slight blur of living, breathing children struggling to remain motionless, but the girl was perfectly, impossibly still. Michael purchased the photograph for $5, along with several others to avoid drawing attention to his specific interest. Back in his apartment in Lincoln Park, he placed the image under his professional magnifying lamp and examined every detail. The more he studied it, the more convinced he became that something was profoundly wrong with this picture. This wasn't just an unusual portrait. This was a photograph hiding a story that demanded to be uncovered. Michael spent 3 days examining the photograph before beginning his research. He used his professional equipment to create high-resolution scans, studying every pixel of the century-old image. The photography studio's name was barely visible on the bottom right corner. Aldrich & Sons Photography, Chicago, Illinois. He started with the studio itself. Research at the Chicago History Museum revealed that Aldrich & Sons had operated from 1898 to 1923 on State Street, specializing in family portraits. The studio had kept meticulous records, and many had been preserved when the business closed. Michael requested access to their ledgers from 1905. The museum archivist, a young woman named Sarah, brought him 3 leather-bound books covering that year. Michael worked through them methodically, looking for entries from the spring and summer when children typically had formal photographs taken. He was searching for any mention of 3 siblings, 2 boys and a girl. It took 4 hours, but he found it. An entry dated June 15, 1905. Whitmore family, 3 children. Special accommodation requested for youngest child. Fee, $12. Photographer, J. Aldrich himself. The words special accommodation made Michael's pulse quicken. What kind of accommodation? And why had the studio's owner, not one of his assistants, handled this particular session? Michael copied the entry and searched for more information about the Whitmore family. Chicago City directories from that era were available on microfilm. He found them. Robert Whitmore, listed as a factory supervisor, residing at 1847 South Halsted Street with his wife Grace and 3 children, Thomas, Henry, and Clara. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The names matched the ages he'd estimated from the photograph. But it was the next step in his research that changed everything. Michael requested birth and death records for the Whitmore children from the Cook County archives. What he discovered made him sit back in his chair, staring at the documents in disbelief. Clara Whitmore, born March 3, 1901. The record showed something else, something that explained why she looked so different in that photograph, so unnaturally still, so strangely perfect. Medical notation: acute poliomyelitis, diagnosed September 1905, severe paralysis. But the photograph was dated June 1905, 3 months before the diagnosis. Michael's confusion deepened as he cross-referenced the dates. If Clara had been diagnosed with poliomyelitis in September 1905, why did she appear so strangely immobile in a photograph taken 3 months earlier? He needed medical records, but hospitals from that era rarely preserved detailed patient files, especially for children. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While researching polio outbreaks in early 1900s Chicago, Michael discovered that Cook County Hospital had maintained extensive documentation of infectious disease cases as part of a public health initiative. The records were stored at the Illinois State Archives in Springfield. Michael made the 3-hour drive on a rainy Tuesday morning. The archivist, an elderly man named Mr. Patterson, helped him navigate the hospital's infection disease logs from 1904 to 1906. The records were organized by disease type and admission date. Under poliomyelitis cases from 1905, Michael found Clara's file. It was thicker than he expected, over 30 pages of medical notes, treatment records, and physician observations. He began reading, and the story that emerged was heartbreaking. Clara had first shown symptoms in late 1904, not September 1905 as the official diagnosis indicated. The initial notes, dated December 1904, described a 4-year-old girl brought in by her parents with fever, neck stiffness, and progressive muscle weakness. Within weeks, she had lost the ability to walk. By February 1905, she couldn't move her arms. By April, she required assistance to sit upright. The September 1905 date marked when the paralysis was deemed permanent and irreversible, not when it began. Dr. Augustus Thornton, the attending physician, had written extensive notes. One entry from May 1905 stood out. Patient's older brothers, Thomas, age 12, and Henry, age 10, demonstrate remarkable dedication to their sister's care. They have learned to position her properly, support her weight, and ensure her comfort. The family has requested guidance on how to include Clara in normal family activities despite her condition. Another note, dated June 10, 1905, just 5 days before the photograph was taken, read, "Family wishes to have formal portrait made. Expressed concern about Clara's appearance and dignity. Discussed positioning techniques to allow her to participate while maintaining her comfort and safety." Michael sat back, his throat tight. The photograph suddenly made terrible sense. Armed with new understanding, Michael returned to Chicago and examined the photograph again. Every detail now carried different meaning. The elaborate white dress wasn't just fancy. It was carefully designed to conceal Clara's condition. The high collar and long sleeves hid her thin, wasted muscles. The full skirt draped strategically over her legs, which could no longer support her weight. The ornate chair wasn't decorative. It was functional. Michael could now see, when he looked closely, that the chair had a high back that supported Clara's spine and armrests positioned to hold her torso upright. Her brothers weren't simply posing beside her, they were positioned to help keep her stable, their bodies close enough to catch her if she began to tip over. Her hands, arranged so precisely in her lap, weren't positioned that way by choice. Someone had placed them there, likely her brothers or the photographer, because Clara couldn't move them herself. The unnatural stillness that had disturbed Michael wasn't deliberate posing. It was the reality of complete paralysis, and her eyes, those empty, unfocused eyes, weren't looking at nothing. Clara simply couldn't control her eye muscles well enough to focus on the camera like her brothers could. Michael felt ashamed of his initial reaction. He had found the photograph disturbing, almost sinister, but there was nothing sinister here. This was a family trying desperately to give their paralyzed daughter a moment of normalcy, a place in the family portrait, dignity in the face of devastating illness. But questions remained. Why had the Whitmore family gone to such elaborate lengths? Most families with disabled children in 1905 simply excluded them from formal photographs or had them photographed separately. What had motivated Thomas and Henry's obvious devotion to their little sister? And what had happened to the 3 siblings after this photograph was taken? Michael needed to find out if any Whitmore descendants still lived in Chicago. He started with genealogy databases, tracing the family line forward through birth records, marriage certificates, and census data. The search would take time, but Michael felt compelled to understand the complete story behind those 3 faces, frozen in time. Michael's genealogical research revealed a surprising pattern. Thomas and Henry Whitmore had both remained in Chicago their entire lives, never marrying, living together until their deaths. Thomas in 1968 at age 75, Henry in 1971 at age 76. They had worked as teachers at the same elementary school on the South Side for over 40 years, but it was their obituaries that provided the most revealing information. Thomas's obituary in the Chicago Tribune mentioned that he had dedicated his life to special education, pioneering programs for children with physical disabilities. Henry's obituary noted his tireless advocacy for accessibility in public schools and his establishment of the Clara Whitmore Memorial Fund for Disabled Children. The Clara Whitmore Memorial Fund. Michael's heart raced as he searched for information about this organization. He found records at the Chicago Community Trust showing the fund had been established in 1912 and had provided assistance to families with disabled children for over 50 years before being absorbed into a larger charity in 1965. Michael calculated quickly. Clara would have been 11 years old that year. Had she died then? Was that why her brothers had created a memorial fund? He returned to the Cook County death records, searching for Clara Whitmore. He found the entry. Clara Whitmore died February 14, 1912, age 10 years, 11 months. Cause of death: respiratory failure, complications of poliomyelitis. But there was an attachment to the death certificate, something Michael had never seen before. A letter from Dr. Thornton, Clara's physician, written to the Cook County Medical Examiner. Michael requested the full file and received it 3 days later. Dr. Thornton's letter was remarkable. He described Clara's 7 years living with complete paralysis, unable to move, speak clearly, or care for herself in any way. But he also described her intelligence, her understanding, her ability to communicate through eye movements and facial expressions that her brothers had learned to read perfectly. Clara Whitmore lived a life that would have destroyed most people, Dr. Thornton wrote. But her brothers, Thomas and Henry, gave her something extraordinary. They gave her presence, participation, and dignity. They carried her to school with them when possible, read to her every evening, described the world beyond her bedroom in vivid detail. They treated her not as an invalid, but as their beloved sister who simply needed help experiencing life. Michael knew he needed to speak with someone who had known the Whitmore brothers personally. But both men had died decades ago, and finding anyone who remembered them seemed impossible. Then he had an idea: the elementary school where they had taught. Lincoln Elementary on South Ashland Avenue was still operating, now serving a different neighborhood demographic than in the Whitmore brothers' era. Michael called the school and explained his research. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, was intrigued and invited him to visit. "We have an archive room," she said. "Old yearbooks, photographs, some teacher records. The school was built in 1897, so we have materials going back over a century. You're welcome to look through them." The archive room was a converted storage closet on the 3rd floor, lined with metal shelves holding decades of school history. Michael spent an entire afternoon going through yearbooks from the 1920s onward, looking for references to Thomas and Henry Whitmore. He found them in the 1928 yearbook. Both brothers appeared in a photograph of the teaching staff, standing in the back row. Thomas taught 5th grade, Henry taught 3rd grade. But what caught Michael's attention was a caption beneath a different photograph, a picture of students in wheelchairs and on crutches, with Thomas and Henry kneeling beside them. The caption read, "Mr. Thomas Whitmore and Mr. H.Q. Henry Whitmore with students from our Special Assistance Program, which they founded in 1925 to ensure all children, regardless of physical limitations, can receive quality education." Just 13 years after Clara's death, her brothers had created a program to help other children like her. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. "Finding what you need?" Michael showed her the photograph. "Do you know anything about this program?" She smiled. "The Whitmore program? It's still running, actually. We renamed it in their honor when they both passed away. It's now one of the most comprehensive special education programs in the city. We serve about 80 students with various physical disabilities." Michael felt goosebumps rise on his arms. "Is there anyone still around who knew the brothers personally?" Mrs. Rodriguez thought for a moment. "There's one person, Miss Alice Brenner. She was a student teacher here in the 1960s, worked directly with both Whitmore brothers before they retired. She's 92 now, lives in a nursing home in Oak Park, but her mind is still sharp. Would you like her contact information?" Sunrise Senior. Living in Oak Park was a modern facility with bright, cheerful common areas. Michael arrived on a Saturday morning with the 1905 photograph carefully protected in a folder. The receptionist called Miss Brenner's room, and a few minutes later, a small, alert woman with white hair and bright blue eyes came down in a wheelchair. "You're the young man asking about Thomas and Henry?" she said, her voice strong despite her age. "I haven't thought about them in years. Wonderful men. Let's sit where there's good light." They settled in a sunny corner of the common room. Michael showed her the photograph. Alice put on her reading glasses and studied it carefully, then looked up with tears in her eyes. "Oh my, this must be Clara. They talked about her constantly, you know. Everything they did was for her, or because of her. They never said it directly, but you could tell." "What were they like?" Michael asked. Alice settled back in her wheelchair, her eyes distant with memory. "Gentle, patient. They understood suffering in a way other teachers didn't. When a child struggled, physically, emotionally, academically, Thomas and Henry never showed frustration. They had this way of meeting children exactly where they were and helping them move forward from there." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I was 23 when I started student teaching at Lincoln. I thought I knew about education, about children. But Thomas, Mr. Whitmore, we called him then, taught me something I've never forgotten. He said, every child wants the same thing, to be seen, to matter, to participate in life. Physical limitations don't change that. Our job is to find ways to make participation possible." "He said that came from Clara?" Michael asked. Alice nodded. "He told me once, late in the afternoon when we were preparing materials for the next day. He said Clara had been completely paralyzed from age 4 until her death at 10. She couldn't walk, couldn't use her hands, couldn't speak clearly, but she was brilliant. They could see it in her eyes, in the small sounds she could make, in her expressions. She understood everything. She wanted to participate in family life, in conversations, in decisions. So they found ways to let her." "How?" Michael leaned forward. "They developed a system. Eye movements for yes and no. Different facial expressions for different needs. They carried her everywhere, described everything they saw, read every book aloud. When neighborhood children came to play, Thomas and Henry would position Clara so she could watch and included her in games by asking her yes or no questions she could answer." Alice continued, her voice soft with emotion. "Thomas told me that the 1905 photograph was his father's idea. Robert Whitmore, that was their father, understood that most people saw Clara as a burden, as something to hide away, but he refused to accept that. He wanted a formal family portrait showing all 3 children as equals." She picked up the photograph again, examining it closely. "Look at how they positioned her. The chair supporting her spine, the dress concealing her condition, her brothers right there to steady her. Everything about this photograph was designed to show Clara as part of the family, not separate from it. That was revolutionary for 1905. Michael understood now. The photographer's note mentioned special accommodation. "They spent hours figuring out how to make this work." "I'm sure they did," Alice agreed. "And look at Thomas and Henry's faces. They're not just posing. They're focused on Clara, making sure she's secure, watching for any sign of discomfort. You can see the love there, even in a formal portrait. They were probably 10 and 12 years old in this picture, and they were already her protectors." "What happened after Clara died?" Michael asked gently. Alice's expression grew sad. "Thomas said it broke their parents. Their mother, Grace, died 2 years later, 1914, I think. Heart failure, officially, but Thomas believed she died of grief. Their father lasted until 1920. After his death, Thomas and Henry inherited the house on Halsted Street. They lived there together, both working as teachers, both dedicating themselves to helping disabled children." She paused, wiping her eyes. "Thomas told me they made a promise at Clara's grave. They promised her that her life would matter, that her suffering wouldn't be meaningless. Every child they helped, every program they created, every barrier they broke down, it was all for Clara." Michael felt his throat tighten. "The memorial fund they established. In 1912, the year she died," Alice finished. "They were barely adults themselves. Thomas was 19, Henry 17, but they took the small inheritance from their mother and created that fund. It grew over the decades, helping hundreds of families afford the equipment and care their disabled children needed." Alice handed the photograph back to Michael. "That picture isn't just 3 siblings posing. It's a testament to what love looks like when it refuses to accept limitations." Michael spent the next 2 weeks piecing together the complete narrative. He found letters between Thomas and Henry in the Chicago History Museum archives, donated after their deaths. The letters, written when they were elderly men, reflected on their childhood and their sister. One letter from Thomas to Henry, dated 1965, was particularly moving. I've been thinking about Clara lately, perhaps because I'm getting old and memories become more precious. Do you remember the day Father took us to Aldrich's studio for that photograph? We were so nervous about keeping Clara stable and comfortable. The photographer, Mr. Aldrich himself, was so patient. He spent over an hour getting the lighting and positioning exactly right. Clara couldn't speak, but I could see in her eyes that she understood what was happening. She was being included, being treated as part of the family in a public, official way. I think that photograph was one of the happiest days of her short life. Henry's response, found in the same collection, read, "I remember it perfectly. I remember how carefully Mother dressed Clara that morning, how she styled her hair, how she whispered to her the whole time, telling her how beautiful she looked. I remember Father's insistence that the photograph show all three of his children together, equally important, equally loved. And I remember Clara's eyes, how they seemed to shine with joy despite her inability to smile properly. That photograph wasn't just a picture, it was a statement. This is our daughter. This is our sister. She matters." Michael also found newspaper articles about the Whitmore brothers' educational work. A 1952 article in the Chicago Sun-Times titled, "Brothers Dedicate Lives to Disabled Children," included interviews with former students and their families. One mother said, "Mr. Thomas and Mr. Henry saw potential in my son when everyone else saw only limitations. They treated him like he was capable of anything, and because of their belief, he became capable of anything." The article mentioned that the brothers never spoke publicly about their motivation, but colleagues understood it came from deeply personal experience with a disabled family member. Michael's final discovery came from the Cook County property records. The Whitmore house on Halsted Street had been sold in 1971 after Henry's death. The new owners had renovated extensively but found something during demolition. A small room on the second floor that had been preserved exactly as it was in 1912. Michael contacted the current owners of the Halsted Street house, explaining his research. They invited him to visit and showed him photographs they had taken before the renovation. Clara's room had remained untouched for nearly 60 years after her death, a shrine maintained by her brothers. The photographs showed a small bedroom with carefully preserved possessions, books on shelves, a collection of dolls arranged on a dresser, drawings pinned to walls, and a chair, the same ornate chair from the 1905 photograph, positioned by the window. On the wall above the chair hung that family portrait in its original frame. The current owner, a woman named Jennifer, explained, "When we bought the house in 1972, the estate lawyer told us the previous owners, two elderly brothers, had specifically requested this room remain sealed until their deaths. After they both passed, we found it exactly like this. We took pictures before renovating because it felt important to document it. We didn't know the story behind it until now." Michael carefully documented everything, then wrote a comprehensive article about the Whitmore family for the Journal of Chicago History. He titled it, "Three Siblings in a Photograph, a Portrait of Love and Inclusion in 1905 Chicago." The article generated unexpected attention. Lincoln Elementary contacted Michael to create a permanent exhibit about the Whitmore brothers and Clara. The exhibit opened in 2019, featuring the 1905 photograph, Clara's medical records, letters between the brothers, and testimonials from the hundreds of students whose lives had been changed by the Whitmore program. At the exhibit opening, Michael met three former students of Thomas and Henry, now elderly themselves. One man, using a wheelchair, said, "Mr. Henry told me once that his sister taught him the most important lesson of his life, that disability doesn't define worth, that every person deserves dignity and participation, and that love means finding ways to include people, not reasons to exclude them. That lesson changed my life, and I've tried to pass it on to my own children and grandchildren." Michael looked at the 1905 photograph, now beautifully preserved and displayed prominently in the exhibit. He finally understood what he was seeing. This wasn't a disturbing image of difference. It was a powerful statement of equality, captured in a moment when society routinely institutionalized and hid disabled children. The Whitmore family, through their actions, their love, and their refusal to accept limitations, had declared that Clara belonged, that she mattered, that she was their daughter and sister without qualification. Two boys and their paralyzed little sister, frozen in time, had taught a lesson that resonated across generations. True love doesn't hide difference. It finds ways to celebrate it.